Hello and welcome to this recorded discussion. I'm Heather Pasero, Career Practitioner at University of Southampton, and I run the My Generation Career Coaching Programme at Southampton that supports those who are the first member of their family to participate in higher education. I have a strong interest in the experiences and barriers faced by first generation students at pre-entry on course and as they move towards the graduate labour market. And the first generation student demographic is, because of current societal inequalities, made up of a wide range of intersectional groups such as disabled students, BAME students, care leavers, along with others who are overcoming barriers such as caring responsibilities, complex family issues, poverty and other vulnerable factors. This morning, I'll be hosting a discussion with my panel to look at how the current land lies for these students and graduates and what can be done at this opportunity in time to address some of the big issues facing the education sector and what can be done to increase the mobilisation of the educated working classes. Today, I'm grateful to welcome my guests. Firstly, Lee Elliot Major.
Oh, so do you want me to introduce myself? Yeah.
Please do, yeah.
So I am Lee Elliot Major. I'm the country's first Professor of Social Mobility based at the University of Exeter. I was formerly Chief Exec of the Sutton Trust charity. I'm also a first generation student, so I'm the first in my family to gone to university. I went to Sheffield University, so it's a professional and personal passion of mine.
Fantastic. And Jessica?
Hi, my name is Jess and I study biomedical sciences at the University of Southampton. I'll be going into my fourth year this coming year as I took a year out in year in employment at the clinical trials unit in the Centre of Cancer Immunology in Southampton. And I am a first generation student as well that's been lucky enough to take part in Heather's my first generation project this year at the university.
Oh, thank you, Jess. And Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter Riley. I'm Head of Widening Participation at Manchester Metropolitan University. So I head up our first generation scheme that supports students into and through the university. I was also a first generation student also at Sheffield University. So it's very much a personal interest to me.
And Charlie?
Hi, I'm Charlie Ball. I'm the Head of Higher Education Intelligence at JISC, a labour market specialist. I'm also a first generation student, although I didn't go to Sheffield University, I went to the University of Warwick. Although my uncle, who was confusingly named Peter Riley, did go to university at the University of Southampton.
Charlie's head was in a spin when I sent that first email out. So confused. Okay, so to start off, I'm interested in what was your experience of being a first generation student. I don't know if anyone wants to take that up. Charlie?
Yeah, I'll start. So I was a first generation student. I'd been to grammar school through the older assisted places scheme, and the grammar school I went to was a fee paying school. And in order to get in, you had to pass an exam if you were a fee paying student. They let four boys in every year out of 128. We'd passed exams, everybody else hadn't, which was a very peculiar and dislocating experience, and I didn't enjoy it. And so I went to the University of Warwick in the 80s because my careers advisor had told me that nobody from my school had been. And I thought, well, that's great. That's a great. And he said, don't go to the University of Warwick. So this is important. Don't go to the University of Warwick. It's a new university and nobody will take it seriously and you won't be able to get a job. I went anyway, but I still found it very difficult initially. Everybody I was with, apart from one boy who was also from Wigan, had multiple generations at university, and there was clearly a language, a code of behaviours, a whole set of unspoken rules there that I didn't know and they did, and it took me quite a while to get to grips with it, and I found it quite uncomfortable for 6 months, maybe first year, and I just felt very out of place and very isolated. After a while, obviously, I got to grips with it, and I've remained within the university system for much of my career, although I left it for a while. But certainly it was very obvious to me. Now, it might be because of the nature of the institution I went to. Although I went to Warwick in the 80s, it was just getting a reputation as being a highly business focused and highly employability focused institution, and was very popular with and become very popular with a lot of people from the middle classes in the home counties. Now, being a northern working class boy, that was quite, as I say, I was quite I felt quite out of place there. And I had people telling me they didn't understand my accent. I had people literally mocking me and telling me to speak proper English, which was really quite unpleasant. And this accent that I have now is kind of a product of that time. It might sound quite northern to you, but it's nothing compared to the one that I grew up with.
But I think regional accents and being a first generation student is a real kind of under discussed topic. I think Jess is, as a more recent student in higher education, who has a regional accent, and how is that kind of impacted on your experience of higher education, or has it? I know you interviewed for a few Russell Group institutions, didn't you?
Yes, yeah, I definitely say my accent has had a real impact. I don't know if my friends have told me it's got stronger for being at home for a while, so, but my Essex accent does really come through, especially when I interviewed for Oxford before I came, and I would admit I scored very highly in the BMAT, so I was thoroughly deserving of my place at interview there at St Hilda's College. But upon arriving at the college, one of my first meetings was someone telling me that they were obviously trying to break the mould with me coming with my accent kind of showing through. They had no idea what I was interviewing for or anything else. It was just a lecturer signing us all in. And I think I have met with quite a few people. I do get comments about maybe it's seen more as common and maybe not as intelligent as other more well-spoken accents, but I'd definitely say that it's something people pick up on very quickly and are quite quick to comment on, as if it's an okay thing and doesn't have any kind of lasting impact on the way you view speakers. You say, Charlie?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if Peter and Lee, you've I mean, your accent is something that never leaves you, and Charlie, you sound perfectly northern to me, and I'm not northern. I don't think you've lost your accent that much. But I think
when I go home to Wigan, they it's very, very obvious that I've not lived in Wigan for quite some time.
Yeah, I've had a bit of that in Salford actually. Going back to Salford and being called posh, but we'll come on to questions like that later. But in terms of intelligence and accents, Peter or Lee, have you ever kind of had to negotiate those kind of perceptions whilst you were at university?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because my accent's completely changed over the years. So I would have sounded a bit more like Jess if, that lovely. So I'm from West London, but I had quite a London accent, and it's really interesting because I think over the years, I was a journalist, and been interviewed many times, and it has changed. My accent's become quite sort of what would be called Thames. When I meet my old friends in London, it does go back to my early days, but I can't. It's really weird, and I find the whole thing about accents really interesting. We tried to fund a study on this. Does your accent affect your chances, given all that? But we've not been able to do that. But I think it is interesting. When I turned up, I mean, I went to Sheffield. I'd dropped out of school, so I'd retaken my A-levels. I'd never been outside my little area of West London, really. And I always remember turning up to Sheffield, which I fell in love with, by the way. It's an amazing place. But at the time, it was quite an alien world for me. And I turned up with two old suitcases. I always remember this, two old suitcases, because I wasn't living with my parents, you see. They'd split up. And I just remember feeling a bit lonely because everyone else seemed to have nice parents with them and they'd been driven up. I'd gone on the train on my own and it was quite a big thing for me, and so those first few days, weeks were, I sort of ended up making lifelong friends, and I loved Sheffield, and I've loved universities ever since. But yeah, that initial entry was quite troublesome for me, I think.
Yeah.
I also looked, and I wonder if Peter, I don't know if Peter looked like this, but I had blonde spiky hair. This is the 80s, remember? I had blonde spiky hair, I had eyeliner and earrings, big hooped earrings. So I did look quite unusual, but the people of Sheffield, I actually took me on. I tell you, they were lovely. There were bus drivers in Sheffield who would call me love, you know, when I got on the bus, which freaked me out a little bit. But no, I really fell in love with Sheffield. So yeah.
Yeah. And Peter, did you have a positive or negative experience of being a first generation student at Sheffield?
It was interesting because when I first got there, I mean, my elder sister and older brother had both gone to university, even though my parents had both left school without any qualifications. So it wasn't as if I was the first to go. And also I went to a sixth form where an awful lot of people went to university. So in some ways, going to university felt quite natural. But it was only when I was doing I did a degree in engineering, and as part of the degree, we were supposed to get a placement. So in the second year, I went to someone, well, how do I get a placement? And the response was, well, do your parents not know anyone who's a managing director or anything? And I went, no. And they went, oh, just get the yellow pages out and just write to companies then. And that expectation that everybody knew somebody.
Yeah.
And as a result, I didn't get a placement. And then when I graduated, I couldn't get a job in engineering. And you looked at it and went, I didn't feel I'd done anything wrong, but it was purely that I looked at other people who went, oh yeah, my dad got me into Ford, or my mum got me into this company.
Yeah.
And things have moved on dramatically since, I think. But I think even though I didn't feel at entry I had that barrier, it sort of became more apparent as the longer it went on.
I think the penny just continued to drop throughout your whole life as well. In my experience working in higher education, you know, from the second, you know, you get off the bus and throughout the whole of your career, you do come into touch with people who do point out your accent and your difference. So that leads me on to the next question. So many first generation students leave communities to go to university and can feel caught between two worlds. And I know I do. How can universities adapt to be more inclusive and promote a stronger sense of belonging? And now, Peter, if I could put that to you, because you head up the really comprehensive first generation programme at MMU, don't you?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because when we spoke to some of our local, we have quite a lot of students who commute into university, and an awful lot of our first generation students choose to do that. And someone said, well, why is it that people who live at home are more likely to drop out? And actually, in having discussions with students, a lot of it is if you've moved away to university and you're struggling with the people around you at university, so you're more likely to get support from people in the halls that you're sharing with. If you're going back home and you're struggling, firstly, if you're first generation, your parents don't know necessarily how to support you, even though they desperately want to. And sometimes the message that comes back is, well, it's okay, you know, you could always do this, or you could, you know, and rather than, you know, if your parents have been to university, they would be going, no, go and speak to your tutor, or go and speak to your careers advisor, or the support there. And it's that being stuck between. In addition, a lot of students talk about their friends at home who haven't gone to university and the way they look at them and view them, which again puts another barrier to stop people really taking full advantage of the university experience.
Yeah, I mean, we did have a question later on, but I think this is quite an interesting point to bring it in, Peter. If anyone else is interested in responding to this, and the question was, what are the... Sorry,
I was just going to add to what Peter, because I think this is one of the big challenges of social mobility that we don't talk about so much. And I know Peter does a great job at his institution, but in many universities, I don't think there's enough thought put into how can the institution itself change to incorporate the different cultures that people are bringing. You know, often I think the social mobility debates get caught up with trying to shoehorn people from different backgrounds into the very middle class norms that most universities still have. And I still feel this, even as a professor. Unfortunately, Jess, your history stays with you, by the way, and I think I'm very proud of where I'm from, but I still feel slightly anxious, not quite right, even now. You know, and I think institutions, and I won't name it, but there's a lot of very good universities who I think are still very detached from the locality in which they exist, you know, and I think we need to break that down. It's one of the challenges that many people avoid in this debate. They tend to go more for, let's get some people like us lot into the universities and make them middle class, you know, and I think that only goes so far.
Yeah, before I go to Charlie, he's got his hand up. We had a student, a first generation student of my project, who we employed as an intern last year to audit the kind of language we use as our projects to support social mobility. And I actually wept at the last line of her report. It said, she said, "I didn't come to university to become middle class." And I thought, that is the bottom line. She came to be educated, the educated working classes. You know. Charlie, you had your hand up.
No, I think this is a hugely important question, actually. And as Lee says, there's a lot of institutions who have not got to grips with the fact that they're part of they are part of their communities, and they benefit from being part of their communities. One of the things that is overlooked in the debate in general is that students living at home is becoming the norm, rather than the exception. The kind of standard model, unspoken model of universities is that, and you can see it in the whole way policy is approached and the way that league tables and the metrics work. Is that essentially you are supposed to move away and live at a university, and then move to wherever it is in the country that you want to go and work, generally London. And that's the unspoken idea of the way that universities are supposed to work. And when universities are not doing that, there's kind of they're slightly looked at askance, and there's a slight concern that they might not be doing their jobs properly. But what is actually happening is that we're seeing more and more students living at home, and that students are a lot less mobile than originally thought. And a lot of my work involves that kind of thing. And as a consequence, actually, we're getting into a situation where universities are consciously or unconsciously starting to tackle this problem, because for each institution, more of their students are going to be from the local area, and so naturally they are going to have to start to reflect that the local communities in which they operate, whether or not they do now already, but they will have to start doing that, and they'll have to get used to it. And the more that universities, and the earlier that universities embrace that and start to work towards it, the easier they will find it, and the more effectively they'll serve their locations. So I think it's not what do universities need to do to embrace this is more a question of universities are going to have to. So why do they not? So they should be starting now. They should be proactive about it, and they should be embracing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are small steps of change. The University of Birmingham have got a brilliant project called to recruit local students called "Hello, is it Brum you're looking for?" and kind of using that kind of accessible language. Jess, before we go on to the next question, could I ask, do you feel caught between two worlds in your HE experience?
I think when I originally started, I would definitely say yes. I've always been like a very much home bird, and the whole experience of moving away from home to 3 hours away minimum, and leaving my mum and my brother was just a really challenging experience. And I'd settled in a flat of 12 in first year, and it was a very different experience to kind of just the three of us, and then with my stepdad 4, going to 12 really loud rogue students that all were kind of very much had the expectation of what it was going to be like, whereas everything for me had been a total learning curve, from the finance to moving in to being really independent. But what gave me like the most sense of belonging and community, and it was a suggestion you always put forward in our sessions, Heather, and you always ask me, have you joined a society, or have you been doing more than just your studies and academics? And I think it's also really important that like universities promote that it's like an all-round lifestyle, rather than you're just coming here to learn and then you go home again. Like, you're not just turning up for your lectures and then hibernating away. Like, get involved with a lot more. And as soon as I jumped in with my dancing, and I got encouraged to audition for competition squads, so we were traveling around the country every year competing, and you had that second kind of family and somewhere else that you fit in, even if you didn't feel on par with your peers where you were studying. I think a lot of people that I've studied with especially are expecting to go on to grad medicine, as their parents have suggested or wanted them to, and they have a real sense of career direction. And it's not always a conversation you want to have, or something you feel like you can relate to. So, but having these extra people and these extra activities and that you can, makes you feel much more like your university becomes a home, rather than just another school that you go to for the day and then want to go run home to as soon as you're done.
Well, that's great that you found some sense of belonging, Jess, and connection. I think, as we've discussed, sessions is always the way forward. So speaking to first generation students as part of my research, entry to HE can bring that discomfort and feeling like an outsider trying to get in to a better future. How do you think HE can become more accessible to communities that have previously felt universities out of reach? So kind of sending the message that you could belong here, or you do belong here.
It's quite interesting. I think it comes back to something Lee was saying before. We get an awful lot of students who come to us who could quite easily get into a highly selective university, and they've been for interviews at those universities, and they come to us and say, I didn't feel like I fitted in there. They go round, they don't see students like them. It goes back to that point. It's as if they would have to become like someone else in order to be accepted there. Whereas they come to our university and they see students like themselves. And in some ways, I suppose it's a self-perpetuating myth that if you don't have them, then you don't see them. But actually, there are quite a lot of diverse students, even in highly selective universities. But do they reach out to them to be their ambassadors? Do they make a positive effort to engage them? Or are the ambassadors those who are already advantaged and therefore are more likely to take up those opportunities?
So why do you think those students think that? Why does your institution seem more to offer a sense of belonging? Or
I think it purely is that we have a very diverse student population.
Mm-hmm.
Our student ambassadors at events are very diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Our academics are probably more diverse than other areas. So that sort of first impression of walking round, people feel like they will settle in better.
Yeah, I know when I worked at MMU behind the reception desk in the late 90s at the career service, I used to be so impressed with all the academic staff with Brummie accents, and they're first generation students, and it made me think, oh, I belong here for sure. I mean, does anybody else, Jess, how do you feel about kind of staff being more, I suppose, first generation and being openly more accessible?
I think it really encourages you and makes you feel like you can have, a positive experience. It's not all kind of a disadvantage against you. I think it's really important to kind of reach out and tell, students. I mean, I went to a school that it was kind of expected you went to university as well, one of the last remaining grammar schools, and everyone was kind of pushed towards that future. I mean, apprenticeships were on offer too, and we actually had a lot of people come in from different universities and different backgrounds saying, like, you are welcome here, like, come and join us, which I think made all the difference, because everyone felt that they had some form of education or something they could go on to that was right for them. I did do a summer school at one of the Oxbridge universities in year 12, specifically designed for this kind of demographic of student, and for one, it was amazing to just be in this cohort of students that everyone was in the same boat and everyone was having this same help up of, you know, what was expected even in your personal statements, and it didn't matter about the finance and you're all welcome. And I think it did wonders for everyone's kind of self-confidence in that, you know, we can aim a lot higher and anywhere we want to is well within our reach, regardless of anything kind of maybe seen as a disadvantage on the offer.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would add, I think universities for me should do almost sort of social mobility audits, and that should be about everything from the pastoral care to the way that lectures are done. I mean, often I find, well, universities are interesting places, aren't they? Because you've got different departments who seem to do their own thing. Then you've got the vice chancellor and the executive. You've got the administrative professional staff. You've got, and I find often, while there are many people doing good things, it's all a bit disconnected, and it's not. I think you have to have leadership from the top, and you have to make sure it's inclusive in every way. And I know that's hard, but I think unless you do that, you're not going to attract students from diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. Moving on from that, I wanted to ask about aspiration and what are the politics of aspiration. And if first generation students are labelled as having lower aspirations, what could the reason for this be? What could the reasons for this be? For first generation students, there is a jarring between expectations of their educators and their working class communal values. And in a post-pandemic labour market, can this self-loyalty to be a positive thing rather than low aspiration? And Charlie, I wondered if you were interested in that, given a podcast I heard quite recently where you discussed what I talk about with students for years, which is find a job you don't mind.
Yeah.
To start off with, you know.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, one of the crucial things here is that if you've no experience of university and professional work, then you simply don't have exposure to that, to the jobs market and what these jobs entail. Coming in, and from a very personal point of view, coming into university from my background, I didn't know I didn't even know that jobs like management consultancy existed, let alone what those jobs entailed. And then finding out that was kind of one of the standard career paths for graduates from my university was it was deeply peculiar. What is this job? Do people do it? Turned out lots of people did it. I had no idea what it involved. And so your aspirations, especially at the age of, you know, especially when you are applying to university and you're 15, 16 and you're doing your GCSEs and you're looking at your A levels, your aspirations are naturally bounded by the things that you are aware of. And if you come from a working class community, and particularly, you know, in my case, growing up in the 80s in a community that had been a mining and cotton community and was in the very brutal process of deindustrialization, you know, the vista of kind of available jobs that I was aware of was extremely narrow. And I genuinely went to university in the hope, well, I was passionate about science, but I didn't see myself as potentially being a scientist because people from my background didn't become scientists. I genuinely went to university in the hope that I'd get a decent job in a shop. And that was my aspiration. It wasn't a low aspiration because there were very few jobs of that nature around. Yeah. It was just I was simply not aware of the range of opportunities that were available because my family, the people around me, the community I was in, had no experience. There was no discussion of other kinds of roles. Oh, obviously teaching. I didn't even really understand how you became a doctor. When I went to school, it was clear that people did medical degrees, but that all seemed a bit out of the reach of people like me, because other people doing medical degrees were all from very nice backgrounds and they had very nice accents and they were very well spoken. I didn't realise at the time that the main requirement was to have really, really bad handwriting, which actually I fulfilled ideally. But I mean, you know, and so it's not so much a question of large, but if you are familiar with, if you are a second, third generation student and your parents have worked in professional work in a city, you simply have a wider awareness of the job opportunities that are available in the UK, particularly in the modern age. You know, if you've got no family history of working in IT, for example, or in digital industry, or in engineering or STEM, how are you supposed to know that these jobs are even available? How are you supposed to aspire to jobs of that nature if you aren't aware they exist?
And so does anyone here think that being the post-pandemic graduate labour market is going to be much more of a disappointment to second, third, fourth generation university educated people? And sorry, Charlie.
I'm not so sure about that, to be honest. I mean, as is always the case, the graduate labour market is going to get very severely hit. It's probably also going to recover more rapidly than other areas of the labour market. And as is always the case, those people who start out with a greater advantage will be greater advantaged in a more difficult labour market. So it might be disappointing to third, fourth generation students that are not quite so many jobs of the kinds that their parents did, but the jobs that their parents did are likely to still be there in reasonable numbers, and they will stand a good chance of getting them because they'll be aware of their existence in the first place.
I think this is really important as well. I think it's too easy for want of a better word, the press to say if somebody isn't in a graduate job within 18 months, therefore they wasted their time at university. It's wrong for so many reasons, but I use my example. I graduated with a degree in engineering, but in 1990, in the middle of a recession, couldn't get a job, so ended up doing a job that I could have got certainly at 16 or 18, but that gave me a little bit of work experience, but I still had the degree. So when I got the opportunity later on, the degree was still there. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now without a degree.
Yeah.
But if you'd asked me 18 months after graduating, then I probably would have been labelled as one of those. It was a waste of time.
Yeah.
Same here at exactly the same time, Peter. And I graduated in 1991, 18 months after graduating, 6 months after graduating, and 18 months after graduating, I was working in shops.
Me too, actually. You know, I think it's hopefully life is long, and this whole panic to get fixed up with graduate employment within 6 or more recently 18 months with the new survey is, you know, it's nothing, you know, nothing to panic about.
It's absolutely crucial as well to make it plain that it's all right not to know what you want to do for a living when you leave university.
Yeah,
absolutely fine. Just in the same way as we don't expect people to know who they're going to marry, or at least partner up with, when they're 21. We shouldn't expect them to have a clear understanding of what they're going to be spending most of their professional life doing.
Sure. Sure. I know I got a job at the career service because I thought, oh, the information room's there, I'll find out what I really want to do. So I was really the architect of my own prison because I still work in careers 20 odd years later. Okay, so this is a question.
It's a good one. This is always good when you talk to a room full of careers and employability professionals, is ask them how many, or ask rooms of people in that kind of field, how many of you expected to do this as a career at 21 when you graduated?
Well, quite, I agree.
And usually you see a forest of lowered arms.
But none of us have got any direction whatsoever. Okay, so this is a question for Tracy Strudwick, who organises our graduate careers fairs. We've only got about 10 minutes left, so we're going to try and squeeze these questions in from the professionals. It was on a LinkedIn, Instagram, you know, anyone have got any questions, things. So Tracy has said, given the impact of furloughing and redundancies hitting lower paid roles, many first generation students and their families will have been greatly affected. Do you believe that being a first generation student or graduate or even applicant during this pandemic has made it even harder to achieve goals?
Well, I do think, one of my concerns, and I agree with a lot of the comments earlier, but one of my concerns from the pandemic is actually the jobs that aren't graduate jobs in many ways, the poorly paid, we have a divided employment world, in my view, that sort of mirrors the education divides. And so I do have concerns about that and the implications for particularly those households who are facing unemployment and furloughing, the impacts on their children as well. So yeah, I do worry about that from a broader social mobility perspective, and I'm not sure we're going to have time to get into those debates, because I think universities, the debate on aspirations, for me, I think you have to be really careful with that, because I believe the working classes do have aspirations, but sometimes they're different to what some in the education world expect of them. And I think it's absolutely right that if someone wants to go into a more academic route, then that's right. But I also think if you want to stay in your local community and get a decent job, that should be equally regarded. And again, the problem with all these debates is it comes in the end back to structural inequalities, and I believe that we should pay people better wages for doing other jobs as well as graduate jobs. Sorry, a bit of a rant there, but I think you've got to put that on the table.
I think you're absolutely right there, Lee. Absolutely and completely right. And we don't want to get into a big debate about all of this, but I would think that I'll back you up to the hill.
Yeah, I think that is definitely for a whole other session, isn't it? And I suppose I did wonder if myself if success and status might have an opportunity to be reframed as we move through the pandemic, with the Clap for Carers, the Black Lives Matter global network fighting for inclusive and spacious movement. Whether this could be an opportunity, but that is a whole other podcast, isn't it?
Can I go back to back to the original question? My big concern, and it leads on from some of the things that Lee has mentioned, but that will be a concern for students from low-income backgrounds in general, is that this erosion of this big loss of jobs in particularly in hospitality and retail is going to have a massive impact on the ability of students to pay their way during university, because so many students rely on these roles to fund their study, to fund their lives and their rent, pay their rent and fund their studies. And those jobs have been hugely hit and hugely disrupted, and it's difficult to see that they will recover rapidly. And that's going to have a profound and serious impact on the ability of students who lack parental support or don't have the same level of parental financial support to even afford university. And that's a really, really big worry for me.
I think as well, I'd add in that I think one of the other challenges is going to be that if you're from a family that's struggling financially as a result of this crisis, are you going to at 18 go to university, or are you going to feel that actually you've got to get some sort of job to contribute towards the home? And inevitably, that if money is an issue at home, that's probably going to come before your aspiration to go to university in some respects. Yeah,
I think that's a big issue. We have a last question now, and this is from Andy Port, one of our career practitioners at University of Southampton. And he's asked, in what ways do you suggest first generation candidates adapt their approach to the graduate labour market as a result of the current pandemic?
Well, again, I think the major thing to do is just try to open out your view and and you need to work to be aware of your opportunity, or to put some effort into making yourself widely aware of all the opportunities that are available. The graduate labour market is set up for the and a lot of the information about the graduate labour market is set up with some assumption that you are aware of the options available. And as I say, that may not necessarily be the case for first generation students who might be highly aspirational, but simply don't know what's out there. And so first generation students should do what they can to talk to careers professionals, to make networks, and their networks can be their friends, talk to their friends about what their families and parents did, talk to their lecturers, talk to anybody at all with industry links, just to get an idea of what options are out there. And always be aware as I say, and the point that Heather said I made in another podcast is that, and particularly at this time, when you're just leaving university, you're probably not going to get your dream career, whatever it is, but you are going to be spending a significant part of your waking life working. So look for a job that suits your values. Look for an employer that suits your values. Don't be too hung up on it having all the components that you need. Good enough will do for now. And then use that as a springboard to work out what it is that exactly is that you want from a job. We kind of tell people, what do you want to do? What do you want to do is as if there is a role that fulfills that. But the experience of people working is a whole group of things. Do the people you work with, are they, you know, do you feel part of a community? Does the employer share your values and do the kind of work that you find valuable? Is the location right for you? And all of these sort of things. And it's much less, in a way, the job that you're doing is much less important than the nature and the context of the work in which you're operating.
Sure.
And that's really what you want to think about. Do I want to be an engineer, or do I want to work for a firm that does good quality engineering?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really sound advice. I was wondering, before we finish, Jess, what is the word on the street with students and the graduate labour market? What are they worried about, and how do you think we could help them?
I think just promoting as many resources as possible as to where to look and what kind of sectors might be recruiting, or even just to promote the message, as Charlie said, to what can you do right now that's a step up in the future. I know a lot of my peers, because obviously I would have been graduating this year anyway, are looking for graduate jobs and are quite failing in the science sector at the moment, or not them failing, but the market's failing them, because there isn't as much on offer as there needs to be against the high competition. So I'd say whatever is out there, even if you don't see it long term, the experience is just like I've done this placement this year. It wasn't what I envisioned myself doing, but it's opened so many doors, and it allows you to network with so many people in other places. So like, I've been able to speak to people in the hospital that I wouldn't have been able to get in contact with before, and I found out roles that I never knew existed. And most importantly, I don't know what I want to do after university. I couldn't answer that question, but I do know what I want from my job, and I do know exactly the values and the principles that and the kind of sector that I want to work in. So I'd just say grab any opportunity with both hands that you think could potentially help your CV or your character building with the interviews, and just get your applications out there and take it with both hands.
I mean, I'd add to that, because my advice to all young people is to be unashamedly pushy, right? Because what I've realised over the years is, and it's taken me a long time to realise this, because as a chief exec, you get lots of people contacting you for jobs. To be honest, it's the middle classes who are incredibly pushy, and in such a way that I was amazed, gobsmacked by. And my personal view was, when I was younger, I just wouldn't do it because I didn't think it was right for me. I was embarrassed to do it. I thought I'd be ashamed if they said no. Now I've realised I honestly don't care. If they say no, I'll move on to the next one, or I might even chat. So I know it's difficult as a young person, but one of the distinguishing features, and this is bigger debates about class divides, and that I think is the pushiness of some of those, and you don't want to go over the top. You don't want to become arrogant, and I think that, because then that backfires. But really be unashamedly pushy, I would say, and don't worry about if someone says no. You move on to the next one. But
I totally agree with that. Heather really encouraged me to keep. That's how I got my placement, to keep emailing the unit that we knew had taken interns before, and my mum always taught me don't ask, don't get kind of attitude. So
exactly.
Always worth asking.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. Before this podcast, a lot of people at work were saying, "How did you get them people?" I said,
exactly.
I just asked, and they said, "Yeah."
One of the biggest limitations we all have in life is ourselves. I've realised, and listen, I preach this stuff. I still suffer from it to this day. I still think, oh, should I contact? Even now, and I have to remind myself, no, Lee, you've done it before. Do it again, and yeah, I know it sounds quite cliche, doesn't it? Advice to young people, but honestly, that is one of the big things, I think. Unashamed pushiness, I think.
Yeah, know your own value. Peter, have you got anything to add before we finish up?
I think it's interesting because also I think first generation students should think about the wider skills they've got. I think sometimes when people are graduating, they look at skills in a very academic perspective. But actually, if you've got a young family, if you've gone through challenges and you've done lots of other things, the balance in a part-time work, and actually, very often people have got the very skills that employers are looking for, but perhaps they don't articulate them because it's just what they do.
Yeah, we're more resilient and we're dead tough, and I think employers are starting to realise that those are really strong employability skills. If graduates come up against a challenge in the workplace, perhaps they won't throw the toys out of the pram, they'll rise to the challenge, make a plan, implement it, and measure the results, and not even realise that it's been difficult. And I think a lot of my first generation students are becoming more aware of their resilience in that respect as our employers. I think that's all we've got time for today. Can I just say a massive thanks? It's been a really interesting discussion, and your contributions, I'm sure, will be really valued by professionals and students when this goes out on YouTube, LinkedIn, all the usual channels and platforms.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Keep safe. Enjoy the sunshine.
Good luck, Jess.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck, Jess.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
See you later.